Rising, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you all here. We have a great show for you all, but first let me introduce myself. I am Anastasia Cole, a Master Gardener volunteer with the University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources Cooperative Extension Division, and I'll be hosting today's Garden in Place workshop. Today is September 1st. Happy September, everybody. So nice. So we have moderators in the chat, so please feel free to put your comments, your questions in the comment section. Today we're going to be starting off with MG Herb with setting up fruit gardens for organic production at home, followed by MG Lydia with living soil, its components, and some of the creepy crawlers that can be found in the soils, followed by MG Judy with good methods for mitigating unwanted organisms in the soil, and then wrapping up, and then that will kind of wrap it up. But without further ado, let's go ahead and give the presentation over to Herb to take it away for us. Herb?
Well, for those of you who have fruit trees in your gardens, and you should, because fruit tree makes a very, very important component of a California garden. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about how to set up your garden and orchard for organic management. For urban orchards, particularly where there are children, pets, schools, community gardeners, organic methods, just like those practiced on commercial organic farms, make the best strategy. And many people with very good intentions fail at this because they think that using organic sprays like Omni sprays is really all you need to do. But the difference between commercial and organic growing is a difference in the fundamentals, because most of the sprays that organic farmers use are rather low in toxicity. They don't last very long in the environment, and it's very difficult to control any kind of disease or insects once they get a stronghold in your orchard or your garden. So today we're going to start one of our brief presentations of a series that tells you how to develop the fundamentals so that gardening or orchard management using an organic strategy is possible. So we're going to have a few slides, and then we're going to go down into the orchard with a little video, and I'll show you how to do one of the fundamental procedures that ensures that your garden is safe and your ecology isn't disturbed. So this is entitled IPM for the backyard orchard, or how to keep your orchard and garden healthy and free of disease. And you got to remember to have to be very, very proactive. You have to really take preventive measures rather than reacting to things that happen in the orchard. So the question is, certified organic farms and orchards produce beautiful and abundant fruit without using toxic pesticides? Well, of course you can. So we're going to have a series. The first part is very simple. The second part that will come in on the 15th will be a little more complex, and then we'll get into the full strategy of organic growing. So let's go down into the orchard.
Good morning, folks.
Can you hear that?
From the Los Angeles County Master Gardener
Thank you.
Orchard team. I'm standing in a community garden and orchard in Southern California. And today we're going to discuss some very important measures for preserving the health of your fruit trees as well as the health of your ecosystem. So we'll get right to it. Today we're going to inaugurate our series of mini orchard talks focusing on the health of your fruit trees and the health of your ecosystem. Something called IPM, or Integrated Pest Management, of the Southern California backyard orchard. We're going to emphasize organic methodology because in the past decade that we've been doing this in community orchards and backyard orchards, we recognize that even though conventional methods, where you spend most of your time in the pesticide aisle of the big box store, is very effective. But in orchards where there's constant traffic with pets and children, vulnerable people, organic methodology is the safest way to go. And since organic orchards can have a huge production line of organic fruits and vegetables without the use of toxic chemicals, we can as well. So today we're going to focus on two of the pillars, the foundational pillars of organic management in our orchards. These two strategies are cost effective, they have very modest effort, and they're very, very successful in maintaining a healthful orchard. Both of these strategies are based on protection of the fruit tree. And the first strategy is going to be painting all of the trunks and scaffold branches with a whitewash mixture which prevents sunburn, particularly in orchards which have deciduous trees where they are bare in the winter but exposed to sun and heat elements. There's a very high risk of sunburn. Even in trees that are non-deciduous like avocado and citrus, branches that are exposed to the sun have a high risk of sunburn. And sunburn is one of the most common causes of loss of trees, particularly in the prunus family. Sunburn leads to cracked and peeling bark. It's an access site for all types of microorganisms and insects. And painting has been an effective barrier to these pests. All we need to do is have a few items, a water-based white primer. Latex primer will do as well, but water-based is what we want. I have a brush, my goggles. Don't leave home without them when you're working in an orchard. A small mixing container, and my water that I'll add to make a 50% mixture of water-based primer and water. The second technique will be what I consider the most effective technique to use in Southern California orchards to enable you to successfully carry out an organic strategy without the use of toxic chemicals. As you can see, I have my equipment gathered together at the base of the tree that I'm going to work on, and I have my little pot that I'm going to put 50% water-based white primer and 50% water. Can of latex-based primer, which is equal to water-based primer. It's useful to make a series of holes along the inner lip of the can, and that way any paint that accumulates in that groove will drip back into the can and make it much easier to close and much neater. As you can see, I've filled my little container to the 50% mark. That's half the amount I'm going to use for the complete paint formula. I've used a dowel stick, and you can use any kind of a stirring rod to place across the mouth of the paint can so that when you pour the paint into a container, it won't run down the side of the can. Now I'm going to add water, regular tap water, to the level of my 100% mark. So now I have a solution of 50% water-based white primer and 50% tap water. Then stir it completely until it makes a very uniform mixture. This is a young avocado tree, and I'm going to paint the base and the major scaffold branches. You've noticed I've already moved aside a layer of compost about 1 inch thick, and I've also moved aside the overlying layer of mulch, which is about 2.5 inches to 3 inches thick. because I want to get right down at the base of this little tree. So I have my modern day whitewash, and I begin right down here at the base of the tree. If there are any branches exposed, I want to deal with those as well. Just recall that the whitewashing not only protects the bark from sunburn, but it also inhibits the borers, and the one that usually attacks these trees is the Pacific flathead borer. Here is the graft site. This is the rootstock, and this is the scion. And I'm going to come all the way up onto the younger bark and get good coverage. The Santa Rosa plum, which was protected 2 or 3 or more years ago, both scaffold branches and main trunk, you can see that as the tree enlarges and the bark stretches, it leaves gaps in dry areas. And these are also at risk for sunburn, particularly in a deciduous tree like the Santa Rosa plum. And this needs to be redone every several years. Here is an Asian pear tree that's already been protected, and you can see the entire trunk is painted, and it goes on up to the scaffold branches. Most of them continue to have the paint that was put on last season. The tree remains very healthy and will resist the risk of sunburn.
Well, there you have it. It's one of the simplest measures. Kids love to help, and it's a great lesson for them in ecology and agroecology. And we'll go into a more complex basic measure on the next episode. But Anastasia, I have time for a few questions if you like.
Thank you, Herb. That was wonderful. Thank you for taking the time out to make that video. Very informative. Thank you. And we look forward to part 2 of that of the video. So we do have a question in the chat from Steph. They say, does this technique work on non-fruit trees as well? I have a young ginkgo tree.
It would work. It usually isn't used on landscape trees because just the aesthetics is different. In an orchard, it looks very, very normal and natural, but in landscape, there are places that do paint the trunks, and like in Chicago and at private facilities like Disneyland, but it certainly would work. And it depends on what type of insects would attack the tree. And most of the landscape trees have a very, very big and full canopy that protects the bark from sunburn. But a lot of the deciduous trees that we have come from the northern climates where they lose all their leaves during the winter. And so they're not used to this Southern California exposure to the sun. But most of our landscape trees have natural protection and really don't need to be painted.
Thank you. We actually have a question a little bit above. Nicole says, what organic fertilizer to use for my lemon tree? This tree is over 10 plus years old. It's probably not related, but do you have an answer for that one?
Yes. Citrus trees use quite a bit of nitrogen, actually, much more so than any of the other fruit trees. Most fruit trees, you want to use very little nitrogen, but citrus trees rely on it because they're growing all year round and they're flowering and fruiting and everything at the same time. So a good source of that is fish meal or some type of fish fertilizer. Compost has very, very little nitrogen in it, practically none, but it is helpful for the growth of citrus trees. But a good source of nitrogen is alfalfa meal, cotton meal, fish meal. Those things are high in nitrogen and they're organic and they break down slowly and they supply the tree over a long period of time.
Wonderful. Thank you for asking that question. I have, well, let's do one more. We have Michaela Anderson. They ask, is it okay to whitewash exposed, which she means like fire damage, but still alive in fruit setting, 20-year-old citrus, which has underlying lying hardened skin exposed, which there's no bark in places, for an example?
Yes, very often that's a consequence of sunburn, and the bark peels off and leaves the tree vulnerable. And you can paint over that as long as there's some cambium. The tree will stay alive. Many of you have seen when hiking a tree that's been struck by lightning and it's just a hollow tube, really. But as long as the cambium is intact, at least maybe 50%, the whole tree will stay alive. So it is a good idea to try and protect that tree. Very often you might want to add something like copper or permethrin, and we can discuss that later on when we discuss IPM, but it's a very good question. But it will help to cover those areas even though they've already been burned.
Thank you. And if anyone wanted to put any more questions in the chat, feel free to do so. And if we have time, we'll go ahead and answer those at the end. Thank you so much, Herb, for sharing. Let's go ahead and give it over to Lydia, Master Gardener Lydia, who will take it away from here. Lydia?
Thank you, Anastasia, and thank you, Herb. My name is Lydia. I've been a Master Gardener since 2016, and I want to talk with you about your soil, how to make it, how to grow healthy soil and how to keep it healthy. I can give you some practical tips, easy things to do at the end of the presentation, but first I'd like to spend a little bit of time with you trying to get a picture in our heads about what life is like in the soil. There's billions of tiny organisms in the soil, and they're critical to growing, to making your soil healthy. It's an ecosystem down there, just like you have an ecosystem above ground. And these little critters form a community. And when they're all in balance and your soil is healthy, they're able to keep the troublemakers out. So if you don't mind, Jeff, let's try the first slide. So now more than ever, we need to think about growing healthy soil. We're losing it as a critical resource. With the climate change heating up and the soil getting hotter and warmer, and in some instances with the soil flooding, we have less and less arable soil for farmers to farm. And also results is that the crop yield goes down. Sometimes they're total crop failures. And this is especially the case in countries that can't depend on irrigation, they depend on the rainfall. And what happens in the process, not only does the crop yield go down, but the nutritional value of the plants suffer when the soil is poor. When there's no nutrition in the soil, there's nothing for the soil to give to the plants. Okay, let's try the next slide. Next slide, please, Jeff. Can you hear me?
Yeah, 1 second. For some reason, the screen share dropped.
So I think part of the problem that we've had thinking about soil is industrial agriculture. We've really treated the soil as something that's a bit sterile. We put fertilizers in, we grow our plants, pull up the plants, repeat the process. And over the years, it has been helpful, it's served us, but now our soil is depleted and we have to think about taking better care of the soil. Okay, next. This is the Huntington Ranch Garden. I imagine a few of you have been there. It's a gorgeous place. It really is a true living ecosystem. Not only do they grow an abundance and a large variety of vegetables, there are a number of fruit trees of different varieties, and also native plants. where pollinators can live and survive, and they also pollinate the vegetables and fruits. I would like to ask you, so there's just an abundance of living animals, organisms in the ranch here, in the garden here. I'd like to ask you all, what are some of the critters that you see in your garden? Anybody want to chime in?
Worms are there.
Worms, ants, spiders, millipedes. How about birds? Any kind of birds that you see? Bees,
Hummingbirds.
hummingbirds, beetles. So your gardens are full of life. I saw a sign on angleworms, butterflies. It goes on and on, tomato bugs. I saw a poster on Facebook, a photo of a poster that said, if your plants aren't eaten by insects, you don't have an ecosystem. So the key is to keep things in balance. Okay, let's try the next slide. Picture bugs. Here are some of the critters that I found at the Huntington Ranch. Native bees, birds that eat the native plants and trees, beetles, butterflies and moths, and lizards. So this, you will see, is a living, breathing ecosystem. Here's a representation of it. But look at what's going on underground. In fact, there's as much life, there's actually really more life underground than there is above ground. And these two ecosystems, below and above ground, they function together. You can see when the bird poops, it fertilizes the soil grows healthy plants, the loop goes on and on. Next, please. I think another reason we don't really pay a lot of attention to our soil is because we can't see it. We don't think about what's going on down there. But do you ever turn over a leaf and look just under the topsoil? You start to see some of the life that's going on there. So once again, let's try to think in our heads, get a picture of what's going on in the soil. Next, please. The soil, you've probably seen this before. Healthy soil is composed, about half of it is air and water, a combination in equal parts of air and water. Because plant roots need water, obviously, they also need air. And then 45% of healthy soil are your minerals. It's your parent material. It's what comes to us from the mountains, brought to us by the rivers and the streams and the wind. That's 45%. But that 5% is organic matter. And that's really the critical magic, the magic stuff. It contains it contains things that were once living and dead. So leaves that have fallen to the ground, fruit, vegetables, twigs, dead animals, poop, but also living animals. This is the 5%, the living animals in the soil. Okay, next. Yeah. So here are some of the little critters that I found at the Huntington Ranch garden. Gophers, sow bugs or pill bugs, ants, worms, and spiders. They also live in the ground, along with slugs. What are some of the things that you all have observed in your soil? Okay, we just hold it there for a second, Jeff. Anybody want to contribute what you've seen in the soil? Grubs, old roots and leaves, gophers, plenty of gophers, worms, ants. Some things live in the soil below and above, in the soil. Argentine ants, cat poop, yep, pill bugs. Okay, so here are some of the things that you might see. Oh, I think if you could go back one, Jeff, I think there's a slide before that possibly. Oh, No, that was it, but let me just add something to it if you would. If you could go back one. Sorry about that. So these animals tend to be right on top, on the very topsoil in the litter of the plants, some of them. And they're kind of the ones who start chomping things down. Now, an ant can't take a huge bite out of a leaf compared to bacteria, but it starts the process of chewing things up with their saliva, just started munching things down. Okay, Jeff, next, please. So next, these are the smaller critters. They're aphids and mites. There's some mites. These are all mites. These are springtails. Have any of you seen a springtail before? Do you know about them? Well, we're going to show you a video made by the BBC featuring Richard Attenborough.
This minute little creature is a spring.
Just get the audio up.
Less than half a millimeter long. They're tiny. This minute little creature is a springtail. It's less than half a millimeter long, the size of a full stop. In 1 square meter of soil, there may be over 10,000 of them. Drying out is a very real danger for them, and some waterproof themselves regularly with a droplet of special grooming fluid. You might even say that they have turned bathing into an art form. They even have 2 inflatable tubes that enable them to get to those hard-to-reach places. To help them get around through the leaf litter, these springtails, as their name suggests, have a rather novel way of jumping. They have a tiny 2-pronged lever beneath their abdomen. One small flick from it can catapult them 6 inches, some 15 centimeters, into the air. It's the equivalent of a human being jumping over the Eiffel Tower. And if they happen to land upside down, well, they have a special way of righting themselves. They use their grooming fluid dispenser to stick onto the ground so that they can pull themselves back onto their feet.
So this grooming fluid that he talks about is essential for a whole lot of soil organisms. Worms have it, and they need it, as he says, not to dry out, but it also helps them maneuver through the soil. And as it turns out, a lot of these exudates are really important to forming soil aggregates. So this grooming fluid, the kind of slimy stuff that a lot of soil organisms have, is actually super important. So springtails eat smaller critters, things like nematodes and protozoa. So Judy's going to talk with you about some of the bad nematodes she's had in her garden. But there are also, thank you. So to back up, these are protozoa and nematodes. And I've noticed that the smaller the animals get, the creepier they seem to get. That orange dot is a vampire protozoa that sucks the insides out of fungus. So that's a parasite. And the other two on the right are nematodes. The one on top is a parasitic nematode that will use that little spear in their mouth to puncture plants or other nematodes or even fungus. But the nematodes aren't super free in the garden. They'll eat fungus, but also fungus will attach attack them. You can see that's a picture of a fungus wrapping itself around a nematode and killing it. So it's a wild place down there in the garden. But as I say, the more diverse you have, the more diversity you have in the garden, the more the good bugs, the good critters will take care of the troublemakers. Next, please. So all the way down, among the teeny tiniest of the critters in the garden are fungus and bacteria. And they are the ones that have the closest connection to the plant roots. They're the ones who at the end of the day, after everything gets decomposted and decomposed, they are able to transport the nutrients to the plant roots and make it available in super cool ways. Before we go on to the next, yes, let's go to the next slide, please. I think the next one, yes. So I wanted to show you, this is a time-lapse video from a Rhizotron. And what that is, it's a time-lapse camera. It's actually a DIY device, a hacked device. They took an old scanner, they hooked it up to a microprocessor, a Raspberry Pi, and put it in the garden. If we just stop it for a second, Jeff. Well, here we go. All right. Yeah, we'll just back up for a second. Thank you, Jeff. So, 1 second, please. They took an old scanner, hooked it up to a microprocessor, coded it, and buried it in some compost. And then they kept it there over time and created a time-lapse video. So this is going to give you an idea what's really going on in your compost, which would be in some way similar to what's going on in your soil. Thanks, Jeff. There's the scanner. We're going to dig it in the soil. And now watch what happens. You can see the roots going down, growing down. It's raining. A leaf is decomposing and the roots are growing. A flower is decomposing. You can start seeing all the wildlife happen, the critters growing. Beetle larva meets a slug. There it goes. You can see the pathways that these little critters are making. Birth of hundreds of pill bugs, or roly-polies. See all the little aggregates, the soil aggregates, the pathways that are being made? That's great for water as well. Here comes the roots. Now it's easier for them to follow in those little pathways that the bugs have created. And as they go along, the soil critters are profuse. They come up and there's a lot more of them that stay very close to the roots of the soil, the roots. There's your soil cam. So, some easy things you can do to keep your soil healthy and growing and alive. Don't pull up the roots. Can somebody tell me why you wouldn't pull up the roots? Any ideas from what you just saw in the Rhizotron? Well, the reason why is because if you keep the roots in the ground, all of the soil organisms will stay around it. And eventually the roots will die and decompose and it's more soil organic matter. If you pull them up, you're disturbing all those pathways, you're disturbing all the soil organisms in the roots. So when you're done with your plants, cut them down at the base of the soil. And then you can chop them up. Here they're chopping up fava beans and leave them on top for mulch if you like, as long as they're not diseased. But the main message is leave your roots in the soil as long as your plants are healthy. Next, please. So this is an example. You can see what we saw. This is similar to what we saw in the rhizotron. These little critters that are living super close to the soil, where they have really, they're talking to each other. They have a connection with one another, and they depend on each other. Bacteria and fungus depend on the sugars that the plants produce for them. Okay, next. Another thing you can do is apply mulch. Different gardeners use different techniques. You can use fluffy wood bits, not too big of a chip. So you can use straw. You can also use the residue from your previous plants. The idea is to keep your soil covered, to keep the moisture in. And also these bits of things, they decompose and add to more soil organic matter. Next. Grow cover crops. I'm going to give you a link to learn more about cover crops, but basically what they do, there are many different types of cover crops. It depends on the purpose that you want in the soil. One type of cover crop are ones that add nitrogen to the soil. So here we're growing beans to put nitrogen in the soil, and after they're done, we'll grow corn, which takes a lot of nitrogen out. So as I said, there's a lot of different type of cover crops for different purposes. I'll give you a link to learn a little more about it. Next. Grow native plants to attract native pollinators. Pollinators will then pollinate some of your important vegetables and fruits, broccoli, cabbage, and other fruit trees. Next. So apply compost. I thought I'd show you a video of my worm bin, and worm bins are compost on steroids. Take a look. This is the last bit of it, but that's good enough. You get an idea. This is these worms are going crazy, decomposting. I think this is some squash. Okay. So just in closing, you've learned some tips for growing healthy soil. Apply compost, mulch, use cover crops, grow native plants, and use, I forget what the other one was right now. But take care of your garden, take care of your soil. Your soil will grow healthy plants, and your plants will make you healthy. And we need a lot of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lydia, for sharing that wonderful presentation. It looks like a little bit above, a couple people mentioned when you were mentioning about keeping your roots intact. Robin mentioned it holds the aggregates intact. And I know that Victoria mentions that it keeps the rhizomes intact as well. And so they wanted to go ahead and chime in. You do have a couple of questions, but I really enjoyed this because you really showed how everything is connected and everything is related. And with that ecosystem diagram that you shared, you really demonstrated that concept of, you know, as above, so below. We have an entire ecosystem going above the ground and also below the ground as well. It's just as important. And wow to those springtails as well. I mean, they're so small, but I'm pretty sure if they were in the Olympics, they would probably win. And yeah, so we have a couple questions here. It says, from Victoria, she says, can I use, and I pronounce this hopefully correctly, bougainvillea leaves as mulch? And those are like a type of, yeah, like a flower.
Another, and you want to try and chime in here? I can't address that.
Well, I mean, there are lots of things that you can leave on the ground as mulch. You just want to keep track of whether the leaves have flowers with seeds, and you're going to get a lot of sprouts. Certain things I noticed, one that was mentioned was pine leavings have a tendency to change the character of the soil. And so if it's not the character that you want, you have to be careful. And sometimes you don't want to put down as a mulch the exact plant that was there before, because you're creating a perfect environment for disease and insect propagation. So those things all come into play. And I have a tendency to use wood chips or shreds that I get as a mulch to keep the water in versus to create nutrition in the soil. I tend to do that in the compost bin. So, but I mean, other people have other approaches as well.
Thank you, Roger, for chiming in on that. We have another question from Moto, and I trust that I think, Roger, did you answer this question already about the fava beans and at what state?
Well, actually, Lydia is going to be our fava bean expert, having run that experiment. They can explain the fava beans, I think, best of all.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
It says, when fava bean plants, at what state before beans form, or even still okay after beans form?
Thank you.
And I think they're talking about using it as a nitrogen fixer.
Thanks for bringing that up. Yes, if you chop them down just when they start to flower, that's when a lot of the nitrogen goes from the roots up into the flowers to produce pods. So chop them down, chop them in fine pieces, and leave them on the ground. And they do take a while to compose, but one last thing, I'm going to leave my email address if anyone would like to participate in a citizen science healthy soil project growing cover crops, fava beans. Please let me know and I'll give you some more information.
Thank you, Lydia. So we have one more question from CB. They say, can you create mulch with California pepper trees as well as palm, pine, and cypress? And how long would you let your volatile oils cure before using on the ground?
I will let other people to join in, but I personally...
I can answer part of that at least. I recently got a drop of mulch from Chip Drop, and I got a drop this weekend that had a lot of like cypress in it, and I got a drop about 4 weeks ago that had lots and lots of California pepper tree seeds, and didn't have a lot of pine or palm or anything, but those are all fine. They all break down slowly, and they provide a good blanket for your garden soil, keeping it cool, keeping the weeds out, keeping the moisture in. There's really nothing you can't put down. Some people avoid things like black walnut because there are chemicals in black walnut that can suppress germination, which is good for suppressing weeds, but not so good if you're trying to grow some garden plants like direct sowing, some carrots or corn. But most of the time, you're not going to get that anyway, so it shouldn't be an issue.
And the thing to remember, as Jeff pointed out, some of the purpose of mulch is to keep down weeds, and sometimes you use it places where all you want to do is suppress everything. And other times, all you want to do is hold in water and provide some nutrient. So if you're going to be growing veggies in a place, you might not want to use things that suppress the germination of the seeds, or which have chemicals in them, such as certain oak trees will have a tendency to suppress everything. They do that naturally. They hold the space for themselves so they don't have to compete for water. And I see Lydia has her information about the Citizen Science Project, the Grassroots Science Project up there. If you're interested, go ahead and make a copy.
Thank you all MGs who chimed in on answering that question. Thank you so much, Lydia, for that presentation. Hopefully we won't run into those vampire protozoas this upcoming October. That would be really scary to run into those during Halloween season. So we're going to go ahead and go over to our final presentation with Master Gardener Judy, who has been bringing the saga. She's bringing those true confessions of a new Master Gardener. So without further ado, let's hand it off to Master Gardener Judy. Take it away.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I need to buy a microscope. So Lydia, I thought that was absolutely fantastic, and I want to make one of those cameras and put it underground, and that was just awesome. But I'm going to talk real briefly, because we're kind of getting close to the end of the hour, about something I promised I would follow up on with you. Could you write quickly in the chat if you're brand new to this, if this is your first garden in place? Okay, good. Oh, that's wonderful. So we do have some brand new people, so I get to do a little bit of review. Okay, let me see. Let me get down to my presentation. Let's see if that works. All right, here we go. It's the continuing saga of True Confessions of a New Master Gardener. That's me. I am in the class of 2020 and just finished my Master Gardener class and have learned so many things and have so many things to learn. So the True Confession this week, and this is the 6th episode of True Confessions from me, is who knew that nematodes would teach me about solarization, and reminded us all that there are good nematodes. I'm going to talk about the ones that aren't quite so good. So these were all new terms to me as a Master Gardener. So let's see. This is a review. A couple weeks ago, I pulled out some pole beans, and had I not taken the Master Gardener course, I'm not sure that I would even have looked at the roots. But I looked at these roots and said, oh my God, I remember something about nematodes. Let me go try to find in my Master Gardener notes what's going on with these roots. And this is what I found, a great, great example of root not nematodes. I went to my favorite place, which is the UC A&R, which is University of California Agriculture and Natural Resources. I Googled that, and then I put nematodes after UC A&R nematodes. More information than I ever wanted to know about nematodes. So I really urge you to use these UC A&R things, because they are very, very helpful. So while I decide, after I read this article, I said, okay, I'm going to decide on using solarization for the root knot nematodes in that veggie box. And then I had to wait for sweet potatoes to come out of that box. So I just let that box stay for a while. So another raised bed over to the side had my, my bird nest gourds. I pulled out the bird nest gourds, and crap, more nematode roots in this whole separate box. And they say it's very easy to spread nematodes, and I'm sure I have spread them absolutely everywhere by my gloves and by my shoes and by my tools. So I decided on, I'm serious about solarization, and my gourds were in a box all by themselves. So I could look up solarization, same thing, UC A&R solarization, and could find all sorts of things on solarization. So let me stop sharing my screen for a minute. This is the article that I read, Solar Soilization for Gardens and Landscapes, and it is absolutely excellent. Told me everything I wanted to know. Basically, solarization is a non-chemical method for controlling soil-borne pests using high temperatures because of the sun's energy, and you cover the soil with clear plastic, sometimes black plastic, but clear plastic for Southern California, for 4 to 6 weeks. So let's see what I did. Okay, so of course, my husband has to get involved because this is a long bed. This is a really big bed. This is 4 feet by 15 feet. And what we're trying to do here is heat up the soil to be able to kill the nematodes. So first you have to till it and rake it and get it all really smooth, because you're actually wanting to get down into the soil, and you have to put the plastic flat. So let's see what happens here. Then you have to water it in. So these are all the steps that are mentioned in this article. I'm not that knowledgeable about it, but it was one step at a time, how to do solarization. So after we watered it for a while, it tells you that it needs to be wet down to 12 inches because actually wet soil will conduct the heat better than dry soil. So we measured down and then went to one of those big box stores and got the plastic. So let me see about my plastic. Got my notes. They recommend clear because it allows the sun's rays to go through and get trapped, whereas the black plastic will absorb and deflect some of the heat. But as you read this article again, there are times in not quite so hot weather where you might prefer to use black plastic. But here, Southern California, clear plastic was the way to go. So the article recommends a thickness of 1 mil to 4 mil. And I chose the 3.5 mils mainly because it was more cost effective and because I actually know that the wind is going to blow it up and a cat is going to sit in the middle of it. And I actually found a cat sitting in the middle of it. And I wanted to get something thick enough so that it wouldn't, nothing would poke holes because you want to keep it airtight. So you spread the plastic out over the top with no air pockets, if possible, as tightly as possible. And then we always have wood sitting around. This is some old fence lumber. And so we tucked it in the sides of the bed and put this lumber on the top. So this plastic is actually sitting right on this bed. And this bed is actually in full sun until 3 or 4 more weeks. And then I'm not going to be, I don't plant in the right side of this bed in the wintertime because it gets too much shade, but on the side on your left, I can actually put in a row of garlic or something because it does get sun. So the soil temperature, it says it can get from 108 to 140 degrees, 2 inches down. So I poked a little hole and crammed in this thermometer. It's a big, long thermometer. It's about this long. And actually, when it was about 90 degrees outside, the thermometer registered about 108 degrees. So this Saturday, I think it's supposed to be 111 or Sunday or something. So I know it's horrible, but it's so good for my solarization. So I'm going to go out and take a different temperature reading and see whether or not it actually got higher because you really do want a high temperature. So that's basically my solarization. I'm hoping that this bed kills those little nematodes. What they say is that the nematodes are so sneaky that they can dive deeper into the soil and hide out and not die. And I usually don't like things to die, but they say the good insects can actually go down further and not die because of the solarization. But I wanted my nematodes to basically die. Nematodes die. But we'll see whether or not this actually works. So then the other box, as soon as my sweet potatoes are done, and Lord knows what those nematodes are going to do to these sweet potatoes, which are roots. So I'll have to see. That's quite an experiment also. But I will be doing solarization on another box and checking my roots very, very carefully. In 2 weeks, I will be back with my 7th true confession. So all you new people, come on back, please.
Thank you so much, Judy, for sharing that. It's been a pleasure to see the journey of like your garden and the things that you kind of go through. And I love the fact that you continue to honestly spread awareness that gardening is a lifelong journey and that there's always something to learn. And now is a great time to hop in. And so, yes, thank you for sharing. We do have a question from Danny, and they say, when nematodes die, will they be nutrients for the soil, or will the soil need to be amended after the solarization?
Well, that's I'm gonna boot that over to Lydia. Now, they're microscopic, remember. Nematodes, you can't see them with the naked eye, so I'm not quite sure what happens when they decompose. Lydia?
There are over 20,000 species of nematodes, and they will die and decompose. Different things will attack them. But one thing, nematodes are able to go into a state of cryptobiosis. So when they are dry, they hardly take any energy at all until they get watered again. And so, and this can go on for 10 years. Scientists have done that for 10 years. So we might do a little research about what you put in there next, because, you know, you might look and see what kind of vegetable, kind of plant you can put in there that isn't particularly sensitive to nematodes.
And maybe when the roots are also shallower.
Yeah, the quest goes on.
Excellent. There was a question, Anastasia, that was way back at the beginning, and I know you're getting ready to wrap up, but folks were asking about what you could start from seed right now. And I took the liberty of mentioning a few things in the chat, talking about root crops and cool weather crops. But I wanted to let folks know that we will try to do a piece about that for the September 15th Master Gardener Garden in Place program, so that we can revisit that. We talked about it early in August, and we should revisit that again in September.
Thank you, everyone. So just a reminder, now that we're wrapping up, it's 11 o'clock, top of the hour. We want to remind everyone that these Garden in Place workshops, they occur every other Tuesday at 10 a.m. So please continue to join us. Thank you, newcomers, for joining us today. We love having you guys all here. If there's any additional questions that didn't get to today, or you may think about a little bit later on, come join us on our Facebook page. It's called Ask an LA County Master Gardener, and it's open to the public. Lastly, if you would like to watch these segments again, they will be on our YouTube page. This was a recorded session, and simply go to YouTube and you can type in Garden in Place Workshops, and you'll see the playlist there. Again, thank you everyone for joining, and we look forward to seeing you all on the 15th of September. So thank you, everyone.